The Greens and UKIP faced a wipeout at the council election. So is there a future for smaller parties in Norfolk? Good evening. The Greens and UKIP were the biggest losers in the county council elections last week. Both parties lost their seats as the Conservatives were returned to power at County Hall with 15 new councillors. So does it mean the beginning of the end for the smaller parties here in Norfolk? Here to talk about this is Martin Schmierer of the Green Party, and from UKIP, Eric Masters. Also with us, the EDP's local government correspondent, Dan Grimmer. So let's get your reaction first, gents. Honestly, did you think it was going to be that bad?
We knew it was going to be tough. We didn't think it was going to be as tough as it turned out, and I think it was clear on the time when the results were coming in that it was going to be very disappointing day for us. And I think that disappointment is not just for us in the Green Party, but I think it's going to permeate out to the people of Norfolk, because we did still get thousands and thousands of votes across the county, and yet we don't have any representation on the county, and there is a problem there in our local democracy. Eric
Masters, you had a lot of councillors, didn't you? Was it 12 to 0? It's a big drop.
Yes, and am I really surprised? Truthfully, no. 4 years ago, we rode into town on Incinerator Gate in the west and in the mid of the county. The Conservative voters went back home again. I have a great sadness for those hard-working councillors in and around Great Yarmouth who did work hard over the 4 years for their constituents. But sadly, on a blue tsunami, they just fell by the wayside as well. I must admit, I woke up on Friday morning and saw the writing on the wall that Friday morning. Yes, we've got support still in the county, but as I said, it's not represented anymore because of how the local government system works and how the parliamentary system works.
OK, I mean, Dan Grimmer, it's a big change, isn't it? They were in the Rainbow Alliance, they were holding the reins of power, if you like, a year ago, and now it's all gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Eric says, UKIP came in. Some people were surprised just how well they did last time around, back in 2013. But they managed to forge this alliance, a very strange alliance, it's got to be said, with Labour and the Lib Dems and support.
Probably unique in the UK,
Greens.
I would think, to have a rainbow coalition like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, George Nobbs, the former Labour leader, described it the other day as their little experiment. And it was. And for 3 years, you know, the Conservatives would say otherwise, but it worked. They were in control at County Hall. And as Eric says, I think that there were councillors there that were good local councillors. They were really engaged. They did represent their communities. They fought to get rid of the incinerator, and they succeeded. And kind of the reward for doing what you said you would do is that you're out, which is, you know, that's politics.
Were you satisfied with what you were able to achieve in that coalition situation as parties?
Well, the Green Party was never formally part of the coalition. It was always a supply and confidence arrangement.
Which means you vote for things as and when you agree with them?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, last year it came to a crux. There were too many issues that we unfortunately disagreed with the coalition, UKIP and Labour and the Lib Dems on. And as a result, we were put in this sort of between a rock and a hard place, between supporting either the Conservatives or this Rainbow Alliance. We couldn't support either, so we abstained, and as a result it crumbled. But the reason for that was because of key issues such as the Northern Distributor Road and the road through the Waveney Valley, which we couldn't see the investment of tens of millions of pounds into when our social services were being cut to the bone by the coalition that was putting through those cuts. And unfortunately, going forward for the next 4 years, that alternative voice, that voice that the Greens did bring to the table and did bring to County Hall, will not be there, and I think that's going to be to the detriment of Norfolk.
OK, well, at the elections last week, the Labour Party increased their councillor numbers by 3 to 17. But because some of the other smaller parties lost their seats, as we've been saying, it wasn't enough to form another rainbow coalition as they have in the past. Former council leader George Nobbs says the general election had a big impact on the result.
Until about 2 weeks ago, this election was about the county council. I think we were going to do a lot better. But obviously the general election's taken over the whole picture. There's been a Conservative surge, and so local issues have been drowned out. And the smaller parties have paid that price. So the Conservatives are going to have a very healthy majority for 4 years.
George Nobbs of Labour there. He says it's the general election that made the difference. Do you agree with him?
Absolutely.
Why so much for UKIP?
I believe that the first 2 weeks of the local elections, we were actually focusing on local issues. And then along comes dear Theresa with this great scheme to have a general election. The whole thing, the narrative got changed. It suddenly became stable government, strong and stable government. That's all we got. And that's all we're going to get all the way to June the 8th now. She is controlling the narrative. And
do voters make that distinction between council elections and general elections, do you think? Or does sometimes it get a bit blurred and fuzzy?
It definitely gets blurred and fuzzy, absolutely no doubt. When you're bombarded every day by Theresa May on TV saying, as Eric says, about strong and stable leadership, it's impossible for people to differentiate between that and the local elections. And I know this sounds awful, but a lot of people, they vote for a party. They don't vote for the candidate, even if that's an excellent candidate. And that becomes even more heightened at a time when there's a general election just around the corner. So yeah, I think the local elections suffered as a result.
Do you think you would have held on to councillors though if there hadn't been a general election in the offing?
It certainly would have made it easier. I don't have that crystal ball that I can look back in time and say this is what would have happened or might have happened. But it certainly did make a difference, because there were people that I was speaking to on the doorsteps in Norwich that were saying, oh, I'm definitely not voting for Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't on the ballot paper in Norfolk. He's not on the ballot paper for this whole local election. And because it did get a little bit confused and a little bit muddled, it didn't help. And I think that a lot of the responsibility does have to go to Theresa May. And I think that what she's done basically is cost the country a lot of money to have two elections within a few weeks of one another, rather than having it on the same day. That's what I think should have happened if she was going to have a snap election, or she should have just kept her word and said, right, she's in power until the next election.
What's the cost to political parties for that, though, having to run through two elections in a short space of time?
Crippling. Absolutely crippling. She allowed us to spend on the local elections. We set ourselves our goals, our targets for the local elections. Suddenly to find that we're now faced with an even more expensive general election after you have depleted your funds is just soul destroying. You look to where you can actually then struggle. We're into crowdfunding in Great Yarmouth to just even trying to come up with the money. However, just going back slightly, when George Nobbs talks about a wonderful day for Labour in Norwich, what he really should be looking at is the groundswell, just because of the strong and stable government, the narrative which is being put out, the amount of Conservative votes which suddenly materialised inside the city boundaries, city wards.
Okay, well, let's hear from our voters. I'm wondering what the voters make of the smaller parties now and whether they really have a future in Norfolk. We went out to ask people in Norwich what they thought.
I'd stick with the main two parties, mainly because I don't know enough about the smaller parties of what their main agenda is.
People sometimes feel if I vote for just one of the main parties, they're not going to get in, that's a wasted vote. But if I vote for a smaller party, I can draw attention to one of the issues that really matter to me. So I think they've really got a place. I encourage them.
I think that the best way to support any in the left at the moment is to just kind of get the Tories out, and the only way to do that is vote Labour.
I think I will vote for the bigger parties, partly to play safe. Possibly the third party might come in, but not the tiny ones. I think really, historically, we've been brought up to vote for one of the big ones.
Well, I would consider voting for the Green Party, which I consider to be kind of a smaller party, just because I believe in those values. Although that's more sort of local elections. With general elections, I'd probably go with the bigger parties.
I would vote for a smaller party, but I've voted Labour all my life, and to me, I don't see how you can vote Labour now.
So some voters out in Norwich there. One of those people said they didn't know what the smaller parties stand for. Is that why you need that bank balance, that fighting fund, to get the message out?
Yeah, I think that is important, of course. I mean, the Greens, compared to the millions that the two main parties have got, are always going to struggle behind that. And when you have a look at, we're spending thousands, Labour and the Conservatives are spending millions. Actually, it's quite surprising how well we've done previously.
You've got an MP.
We have got an MP, absolutely. We have got 3 MEPs for the moment. We have got hundreds of local councillors, and indeed in Norwich we've still got 10 district councillors on the city council. And you do get an awful lot of sort of bang for your buck with the Greens, because it's so much hard work that goes into it. It is about knocking on those doors all year round, not just at election time. It is about making sure that we put as many leaflets through doors as we possibly can, to let people know about the great work that we are doing on the ground. And unfortunately, though we do that, when you hear on the news at 6 o'clock every evening from Theresa May or from Jeremy Corbyn, unfortunately the smaller parties don't have that same sort of voice in the sort of national mainstream media narrative. And when you couple that with the lack of funding that smaller parties have got, it's very, very difficult for smaller parties to make that breakthrough, especially given the voting system that we've got at the moment.
And we'll talk more about that after the break. Someone else said there that she wanted to play it safe by going for the main two parties. Is that another reason why smaller parties lose out?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, Theresa May has cloaked herself in UKIP's coat. She's gone after our key policies. Everyone's now thinking they're wonderful. Years ago they used to think they were wacky, like leaving the European Union, or grammar schools, as 2 examples of. Now she's cloaked herself in our colours, and yesterday, just for good measure, she decided to put a red scarf around it and have a go at full price capping.
OK, all right, thank you all very much. Stay with us. After the break, we'll be talking more about the future of smaller parties in Norfolk and asking, where do they go from here? Do stay with us. Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about Norfolk's smaller parties after UKIP and the Greens faced a total wipeout of their councillors at the local elections last week. On the panel from the Green Party, Martin Schmierer. Also with us tonight, Eric Masters from UKIP, and from the EDP, Dan Grimmer. We'll hear more from my guests in a moment. But first, one man who's pretty pleased with his party showing at the local elections is Cliff Jordan. The Conservatives gains 15 seats, putting them back in control with an overall majority at County Hall. And he says it will help him deliver what he promised in the manifesto.
My Conservative group can stick together to deliver for the people and listen to what the people want. We really can, instead of having to compromise with the Labour or the Liberals or the UKIP alliance and all that. We've now got an overall majority to deliver on our guaranteed programme.
So Cliff, unsurprisingly happy, Dan Grimmer, and there was disagreement, wasn't there, under the Rainbow Alliance. So does it mean we'll see a more clear future, do you think, for the county?
Well, potentially, but I think what Cliff has to keep in mind here is that he can only deliver on these promises if the money's there. And I think there's a big question about whether whoever wins this general election, whether there'll be enough money for local government. So it's one thing for him to say he'll deliver what they've promised. Got to have the money to do it.
Yeah, and there's a big squeeze they're facing, aren't there? Every
Absolutely.
year there's cuts,
yeah,
and there's savings to be made.
Millions of pounds of cuts every single year, and that's going to go on and on. So, yeah, I don't think it's quite as rosy as Cliff might like to paint.
OK, and are you worried now about what the future holds for County Hall and the way services will be delivered?
Yes, I think it's clear. I mean, I'm always worried when the Conservatives get in, whether that be at County Hall or at Westminster. And unfortunately, it's looking likely that it's going to be both come June the 8th. And that means that we are going to see further rounds of funding cuts. That means that social services are going to be squeezed. Everything that we rely on in our city and in our county, everything, as I say, from social care to the parks that we'd like to go to on a weekend, these are all going to be now really under threat. And it was the Green Party and those councillors really standing up to keep sort of environmental protection, to make sure that we have got an alternative to austerity, and losing that voice is, as I say, going to be very detrimental to the people of Norfolk.
But if that's the case, why not vote for these smaller parties? Why do people vote for Conservative?
Strong and stable government. I'm sorry to keep using the catchphrase of the Conservatives. It is money But what do you get for your buck? They can afford to have the media, the press on their side. The narrative is continually rolled out.
They're not here today, though. We did invite them, but they're not here.
And if we had have had a Conservative here, we'd have probably heard nothing more than strong and stable government. And it is a case that they've got the money, they've got the connections and the resource. We do suffer, whether you're Green, whether you're UKIP, whether you're Liberal Democrat, we all suffer the same fate. We cannot compete with the media onslaught, which we're given.
Well, what could the future hold for the smaller parties? Will they still be part of the British political landscape in 5 or 10 years from now? Let's ask our Norwich voters again.
The problem obviously is without proportional representation and the voting system we have, it is very, very difficult for people to vote for a smaller party with any real hope of getting an MP.
They'll amalgamate, they'll blend in, just like UKIP is now. UKIP, some of the representatives of UKIP are recommending that we vote for Conservative.
I would hope that they'd manage to get a bit more of a foothold, but I think at this moment in time the two leading parties have got the stranglehold.
As far as UKIP, I think they've run the course. I think they've set out looking for people that were wanting a change in politics, and they've aimed at them, they've got them, and now they've done the job.
A lot of the time with general elections, people tend to go for the bigger parties because they feel like it might not make a difference if they vote for the smaller ones.
OK, so there's a few things to think about there. Let's start with voting reform. I know you're in favour, but will it ever happen given where we are now?
Well, it certainly won't happen under the Conservatives, unfortunately. But that's why the Green Party has been such strong advocates of what they call this progressive alliance, where we work with other parties, where we share those common goals, in particular our commitment to voting reform, so that we have got a fair system, so that there isn't this thing of a wasted vote, so that 10% of the votes means 10% of the seats. It's simple, it makes sense, it's the only fair way to do it, and that whether that be at County Hall or at Westminster, it's something that Britain is crying out for. We've had for too long this antiquated Victorian system of first past the post, which means that so many millions of votes across the country don't count for anything. There were 5 million people at the last general election who voted UKIP or Green. They got 2 MPs. That's completely unfair.
Dan Gramer, is that why people are disenfranchised? Because sometimes the numbers of people voting seems to be going down, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, turnout in the county council was actually up a tiny bit on last time round. But, I mean, the proportional representation argument has just been going on. I mean, the Lib Dems used to be talking about that all the time. And it just, Martin's right. It probably is a better and a fairer system. But realistically, I'm sorry to say, I can't see it happening.
Because it doesn't favour those ruling parties.
The ruling parties, no. So
and that's exactly right. They don't favour. I mean, if we used the numbers from the 2015, I think you would have got 24 MPs.
Something like that.
We would have had about 86 under proportional representation. Now, it is wrong that 5.5 million voters can be just totally ignored because 2 parties control the narrative.
But then the difficulty is, of course, we had a coalition and then the Liberal Democrats got punished when that coalition didn't go the way voters expected, didn't they? They went down from, I can't remember the numbers, do you?
Yeah, not off the top of my head, but the irony here is, of course, that the Lib Dems, we've got 2 sort of smaller parties here. It wasn't so long ago the Lib Dems were seen as washed up and finished. And they've actually managed to have a bit of a resurgence now on the kind of, the pro-Europe ticket that they're now talking about. So I think it shows that parties can reposition themselves even after they've had what, to the Lib Dems was terrible results. So I think that might give a bit of hope for these chaps that there is kind of life after a bad defeat.
OK, well, talking about the Lib Dems, it is only 4 weeks to the general election. So what, if anything, will do the results in the locals tell us about what we can expect then? Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron has been out campaigning and he's worried about the collapse of support for the smaller parties.
Very rarely does a country get warning of it becoming a one-party state. We've had that warning. The Liberal Democrats are clearly now the only plausible route for that to be prevented. Over the top of that, you have a Conservative landslide across the country as they effectively become UKIP, and therefore some UKIP voters choosing to vote for them. But what this tells us, we have this warning now of what the 9th of June might look like.
So he's worried about a one-party state. Is that something concerning you as well, Martin Schmierer?
Absolutely. I think we in the Greens are very concerned that what we're going to see on the 8th, when the people go to the polls, is people simply voting for the Conservatives. And the decision that a lot of your viewers will have to make is basically what kind of parliament do they want to see? Do they want to see one where you've got Green voices like Caroline Lucas, like some of the smaller parties in there? Or is it one that it is becoming a one-party state? And unfortunately, in Norfolk, we've got that now. We've got a very strong, unfortunately, Conservative majority on the county council. In Norwich, on the city council, it's a very strong Labour majority. And British politics deserves better. It needs strong oppositions as well.
But are UKIP actually playing a role in this? For instance, you're not standing in North Norfolk against Norman Lamb, which puts the Conservatives in a much stronger position.
Absolutely.
And are you happy with that the Conservatives could wipe the board?
Unfortunately, I have to be, because I stood down as the PPC, or the parliamentary candidate for Norwich South, with exactly the same target to take out Clive Lewis. I did it.
So why did you do it?
Why? Because I believe that we can put a Conservative who will push through Brexit into Norwich South, dispel this ridiculous theory which is put about that Norwich are the Remain city, because in reality only the 13 wards of Norwich City Council voted to remain. When you look at the bigger picture and the 21 wards of Norwich, you find that number was reversed.
But by UKIP not standing, Dan Grimmer, they do put the Conservatives in a much stronger position. Those 3 seats they've already announced they're not standing in.
Yeah, potentially they do, and particularly North Norfolk, you'd have thought that is. I'm not so sure about Norwich South, to be honest. It's difficult to judge how many UKIP voters there were disaffected Conservatives and how many were disaffected Labour supporters. So I don't think it's quite as clear-cut in Norwich South, but it certainly makes things interesting, UKIP not being about, put it that way.
Yeah, and one of the other thing our voters said was that people who were voting for UKIP will move back to the Tories. I mean, where is the future for UKIP now? Can they continue?
Very good question. I always thought it was going to be difficult after the referendum result.
I mean, Douglas Carswell says it's over, doesn't he?
But I'm not naive. Paul Nuttall has said that come September there will be a major repositioning. We have to wait and see what that repositioning is. If it's more of the same, frankly, I don't think there is a future. If, however, he's going to be just as we were 10 years ago, with an interesting proposition for the British voter, what will take 2-3 parliaments to come to fruition, then perhaps, yes, there may be a future for UKIP.
We're almost out of time, just 30 seconds. How do the Greens get through this and make a surge forward again in the future?
Well, locally, it's back to the grassroots, it's back to the doorstep. It's making sure that the people that fail to get elected continue as the community activists that they do so well, and making sure that we listen to residents and make sure that we offer this alternative vision. And I think people will realise that it has been to the detriment of Norfolk, that for the next 4 years there won't be any Greens on Norfolk County Council.
OK, all right, gentlemen, thank you. It's been a really interesting conversation, but that is all we've got time for this evening. Thank you to my guests for taking the time to talk to us. Remember, the general election is almost upon us, so if you have questions for the candidates in your area, you can send them to us via email. It's thisweek@mustardtv.co.uk. We're also on Twitter @mustardthisweek. Good night.